This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Stoke City by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, James McArthur and Xherdan Shaqiri after the game. So let's begin. Palace mathematically secured a sixth successive season of Premier League football as they came from behind to beat Stoke City, condemning the Potters to relegation in the process. The hosts led at half-time through Xherdan Shaqiri's deflected free kick, but James McArthur levelled things up midway through the second half after a swift counter-attack, and then 5 minutes from time, Xherdan tucked home the winner to extend Roy Hodgson's team's unbeaten run to 5 games. More importantly, it secured his team's Premier League safety, remarkable given their dreadful start which saw them pointless, goalless and written off after 7 matches, and now even a top-half finish is possible by the time the campaign concludes next weekend. Palace's confidence, which oozed throughout the drubbing of Leicester City last weekend, quickly came to the fore again, as 8 minutes in, some sublime skill from the midfield from McArthur and Wilfried Zaha gave Ruben Loftus-Cheek the chance to gallop forward and curl the ball just over the crossbar, and then Zaha dragged a shot wide of Jack Butland's far post as the visitors started brightly in the spring sunshine. But Stoke were scrapping for their Premier League lives and came more into the game as the first 45 progressed. They spurned a great chance when Joe Allen and Shaqiri combined to create a crossing opportunity, but Juve steered his header well wide when well positioned. However, they continued to hold their opponents at bay, despite some impressive spells of possession by the Eagles. Just as it seemed a quiet opening half would end goalless, on 42 minutes the Potters handed themselves what seemed to be a top-flight lifeline. Loftus-Cheek tripped Shaqiri in a prime position for the Swiss to line up a free kick which he promptly curled over the wall, and the ball clipped Loftus-Cheek before arcing into the top corner, allowing him to celebrate scoring against the Eagles for the second time this season. With Paul Lambert's team now possessing something to desperately hold on to, the second half began with a possession of niggly fouls on Palace players, as the Potters tried to disrupt any rhythm or attacks. That led to an unattractive period where neither goalkeeper was tested until 68 minutes, when a swift counter-attack led to the equaliser. After McArthur had given the ball away on the edge of his own box, Mamadou Sakho won back possession and played a long ball to Christian Benteke, who won the header and found an advancing Zaha. With options either side, the winger slid in Loftus-Cheek, who then found an overlapping McArthur, and the Scotsman capped off a 90-yard sprint by coolly slotting the ball past Butland for his 7th goal of an impressive campaign. That once again allowed the Eagles to gain a firmer grip on the game, and with 50 minutes to go, Andrew Townsend scampered down the left flank and cut the ball back perfectly for Zaha on the penalty spot, but he fired over the bar, and then Benteke screwed wide with Butland scrambling. The tension around the stadium was intense, with the home fans knowing that a second for Roy Hodgson's team would prove terminal, and Loftus-Cheek nearly provided it when he flashed a shot into the travelling fans, but with 5 minutes to go it arrived, to condemn the Potters into the championship. Zaha received the ball on the right and played low centre towards Benteke, but Ryan Shawcross looked to have covered it. However, the Stoke skipper inadvertently prodded it into the space in front of Butland, and Aanholt nipped in to slip the ball past the keeper to score in successive matches and grab the winner for the Eagles. That marked the 4th occasion that Palace had come from behind to beat Stoke in the Premier League, and ended Stoke's 10-year stay in the top flight. However, Hodgson's Eagles can now look forward to next season, safe in the knowledge that they'll be amongst English football's elite once again. Crystal Palace are safe for another season in the Premier League after a 2-1 victory away from home against Stoke City on Saturday. The Eagles fall back from a goal down to record the win that means that they will be Premier League football at Selhurst Park for a 6th successive season. But the result means that Stoke are now relegated, ending their 10-year stay in the top flight. There were plenty of talking points arising from the game. Here are 5 of them. Number 1. Sakho-Tomkins, a case for the defence. Crystal Palace have not exactly been renowned for their defensive solidity in recent seasons, perhaps with the exceptions of brief spells under Tony Pulis and Sam Allardyce. But this season, the blossoming partnership of Mamadou Sakho and James McArthur at the heart of the Palace defence has been key to the Eagles' hopes of survival. There were signs last season when the pair played together, with Sakho and Tomkins impressing in the 4 games that they played alongside each other during the Frenchman's loan spell from Liverpool, with Palace winning all 4 matches where they both started. And following Sakho's signing on a permanent deal last summer, the pair have done so again. In the 10 games this season they have started alongside each other in all competitions, Palace have not lost, with 6 wins and 4 draws in those matches. Number 2. Lucky 13. Crystal Palace have not lost in any of their past 13 Premier League matches against teams starting the day in the bottom half of the division. Indeed, since Roy Hodgson took charge of Palace, the Eagles have only lost 3 times against teams outside the current top 6, with one of those being the first game in charge against Southampton. The only other defeats came at home against Newcastle United and Everton. Number 3. The Comeback Kings. Crystal Palace have won 3 of their past 7 Premier League matches in which they have trailed in at half-time, while Stoke have failed to win any of their 4 Premier League matches they have been leading at half-time under Paul Lambert. Admittedly, Palace have conceded several goals late on, including against Bournemouth, who are statistically the comeback kings when it comes to late goals this season. But Palace's lack of fighting back in games has certainly been key to the Eagles' survival and is reflective of the season as a whole. Number 4. Will he be on the plane? Number 4. Will he be on the plane? Ruben Loftus-Cheek's chances of making England's World Cup squad have been talked up in recent weeks since his return from injury. He has impressed in recent weeks, as he did so before his ankle injury in December, but has he done enough? Former Tottenham and Newcastle midfielder Jermaine Jenas said that he felt last week that Loftus-Cheek was timing his run to Russia perfectly, and that he showed glimpses again here of his ability. Not everything fell for him on the day, but he still played part in some of Palace's best bits of play, with the Chelsea loanee laying off the pass for James McArthur to score the equaliser. He still has one more game to try and prove himself worthy of a place in the England squad, but he would have done his chances little harm with this display. And number 5, record breakers. Ahead of the game, Roy Hodgson said that safety was almost secured, and that he wanted to help Palace set new records in the Premier League. And by ensuring their safety, Palace are now the first top-flight team since Liverpool in their 1899 to 1900 season to avoid relegation, despite losing their first 7 Premier League matches. But Palace could now go on to record their best ever Premier League finish, currently 10th, with the Eagles currently 11th in the table and level on points with Newcastle in 10th. And with Leicester City just 3 points ahead in 9th, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Palace could even clinch the 9th spot. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And much like a forum, it's also a great place to upload any videos, photos and any news articles that you want to share with other Palace fans. Then of course the best place to do so is in the Facebook group. So like I said there in that little introduction, if you are someone who likes to get involved with all the latest Palace news, likes to keep up to date, but also likes to have your opinion heard in terms of reading and sort of commenting on what others are saying, then of course you can follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace, because that's obviously a great place to do that. And if you are someone who likes going on forums, then of course the Facebook group is for you. You know, it's a great place where fans can come together after the game. They can comment on the game, they can comment on players' performances, but also you don't necessarily have to comment. You can just read what others had to say and just sort of compare opinions. And obviously I myself do like to do that quite a lot. I do like to see how my opinion does compared to others. So if you're someone like myself, then of course the Facebook group is a great place to go. And much like the Facebook and Twitter pages, is also a great place to get the latest news. So if you are someone who likes to keep up to date, especially with the transfer window coming up very soon, obviously during the summer, if you do want to keep up to date, then of course do follow us on all our pages. Now another great place to share your opinion is in your YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, with of course 10 being the best. And this is basically that even though I have my view of the game, I want you guys to comment so I can just have a general view of how others thought the game went, because to be honest, it's alright me having my own opinion, but I like to see what you guys thought and obviously compare how you rate the players' performances and rated them, and obviously compare that to mine and see whether we thought all of the players had the same sort of performance levels. And even if you don't want to do that, just comment below with your views of the game, how important you think the win was, how good you think PVA's goal was in terms of the control and getting on the end of that ball, how good you thought McArthur's was in terms of finding the far post, whatever it is, anything about the game. And even if you are a Stoke fan, of course, do comment below as well. But just comment, even if you don't do player ratings, and do comment below something about the game, whether it's about the goals, whether it's about the team selection, or even about substitution, because there was quite a lot of debate about that. So if you are someone who wants to share your opinion, then of course do that. And that's not just so I can look at it and see what others are saying, but also any Palace or Stoke fans that come to the video, they also will be able to view the content as well. So if you are someone who wants your opinion heard, then of course do feel free to do that in the comment section below. So if you do want to follow any of these social media pages and of course join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who I'm going to give a 6. Calm in possession and barely had a save to make. Could do nothing about the free kick. So Wayne Hennessy here, I've given him a 6, and to be honest it was quite a mediocre game from Hennessy, not because he particularly done anything bad, but like I've said in the past few weeks, he didn't necessarily have to do much as well. So it's a pretty average performance, not necessarily in what he did, just in the fact that he wasn't really troubled, and probably that's really down to how bad Stoke have been this season, in the fact that they rarely created chances that really did trouble Hennessy. So in that respect he weren't really troubled, but of course when he had to do stuff, other than a few flaps, I thought he had an overall decent performance. But in terms of things I picked out about his performance, obviously there's not much to talk about, but I think he was calm in possession, which is of course what you want to see. So rather than him just needlessly just kicking the ball long, he was quite controlled with that. And of course, although he barely had a save to make, he was still that presence inside the box, which is of course great to see. Now in terms of the free kick, I'm of the opinion really that because it took the deflection, it completely wrong-footed Hennessy, and of course he wouldn't have been able to dive it. And even if Hennessy did dive to his left hand side, he probably still wouldn't have got there, because he was sort of just off the centre to the right of the goal, so he probably wouldn't have got there. But in my opinion, the deflection, if it hadn't have taken that deflection, it probably would have gone straight down Hennessy's throat and really easy for him to catch. But because it took that deflection, it took it the opposite direction into his left hand side of the goal, so the right hand corner. So realistically he can't really reach that, because he's in a position where if Shaqiri's free kick doesn't take that deflection, he catches it really easily and we go from there. But obviously because it took the deflection, it took it the wrong way. So I know quite a lot of people have been blaming Hennessy, and I've said numerous times this season in terms of him being a scapegoat. I personally don't see any blame from him or for him in that instance, purely based on the fact that obviously he took that deflection which wrong-footed him, and even if he did dive he probably wouldn't have got there anyway. So rather than just wasting a dive, why don't you just stay on the centre of the goal, where if it hadn't have taken the deflection you would have been able to get it. So do comment below your thoughts, but that's my general opinion of it. To be honest, I don't think he could do anything about the goal. I can talk a lot about the deflection, which positions it could have gone, where it did go, whether he could have done better, whether the wall should have done better in terms of jumping higher. So there's loads of different things that we could talk about, but for me personally, I'm not really going to talk about that now, but I do think that Hennessy really shouldn't be blamed for that. Now of course, every good performances, they always have their little bits of, or little errors or little things to pick up on, and I did see that in this game, when you consider how good Hennessy's been recently and in terms of his consistency, he was flapping a few times towards the end of the game. So in terms of a few crosses, there was one in particular where he went to catch up the ball, he clashed with Peter Crouch, and of course it was a free kick because Crouch obviously bundled into Hennessy. But that just shows you actually when he's flapping a bit and he doesn't get the ball cleanly, it could have led to something else, because maybe some referees don't give that. They say no foul, you play on, and because you've obviously crashed into a play, you're not there and they score. But luckily on that occasion we did get the free kick. But it just shows that actually Hennessy, even though he's been good recently, he just needs to make sure that he keeps that consistency up and make sure that he's still controlling of his area, because that one in particular, it probably realistically is an easy catch for him, but because A, he missed it, and because B, Peter Crouch ran into him, he missed the ball there. So there were a few occasions quite similar to that in terms of flapping, but overall I do think he's a lot better than his performances have been this season. And I think one of the reasons could be the reason he's having such good performances and the fact that he hasn't got many saves to make is because the defence is in front of him so good. So maybe it's just a case of he's not necessarily improving, it's just the fact that he's got less pressure because the defence in front of him is better. But whatever it is, we obviously have seen an upturn, let's say, in Hennessy's performances, and long may it continue, because we've got Vicente Gaeta coming in the summer, which presumably he's going to be number one, but I still do think Hennessy's going to be up there if he can continue these types of performances. But Wayne Hennessy here, not really much to do, but still calm in possession, so a good performance from him and a fully deserved 6. Now to move on to the right back Joe Ward, who I am going to give a 5. Was steady enough in the first half now, but incurred the wrath of the home supporters after going down a couple of times with injury, before being placed by Martin Kelly. So Joe Ward here, I've given him a 5, and realistically, with him only playing about the first sort of half an hour of the game, I can't really, criticise him too much when you consider he was injured quite early on, and of course tried to carry on, but of course the injury was too much for him, and he obviously eventually got taken off from Martin Kelly. So realistically, in that sort of half an hour he was on the field, he couldn't really have that much influence in the game, purely because he was carrying that injury from quite early on. But I do still think that actually there were a few times where actually he looked a bit sort of nervous at the back, and there are a few moments where actually it was quite worrying, the fact that Stoke City, whenever they were going forward, they seemed to be attacking Joe Ward, seemingly because they knew that he was a weak link in the side. Now, I said this last weekend in terms of our back four, you've got someone like Aanholt, who's the best left back you can have in terms of going forward and defending, whereas Joe Ward here, he looked off the pace again, and that was very much the case here against Stoke City again, and it begs the question again, why didn't someone like Wan-Bissaka start, or even Martin Kelly? If he doesn't want to start Wan-Bissaka till next season, then why not bring in Martin Kelly from the start? But whatever it was, he weren't really, playing up to the standard he set before he got injured, and he did look off the pace again. So of course, it could be the fact that he's still coming back from fitness, but I think he's played enough games now to sort of get himself back up. So I think it's just his sort of standards have dropped recently, and of course it didn't help the fact that he got injured and the crowd were booing every time he got the ball because he kept going down injured. But realistically, nothing really bad defensively, but he wasn't fantastic, or he wasn't great defensively, and of course, like always, nothing really going forward. So in that small time he was on the pitch, no real impact at all, and like I've already mentioned, got taken off on Martin Kelly, who at first looked a bit shaky, and in terms of the first goal was involved in giving the ball away, but after that I thought Kelly grew into the game and certainly did deserve, obviously, to be on the winning side with his performance from coming off the bench. So Joe Ward, not really too much to say about his performance, but do comment below with what you think, whether you think Wan-Bissaka should start the next game, now we know that we're mathematically safe, and whether you do think Joe Ward will sign a new contract and stay at Palace next season, or whether you do think actually if he doesn't, and if he leaves the club, that paves the way perfectly for Wan-Bissaka to go back into the side. So Joe Ward here, a 5 for him. Now to move on to the centre-back Mamadou Sakho, who I'm going to give a 7. Made a good block early on in the second half, but was guilty of a couple of loose touches. So Mamadou Sakho here, I've given him a 7, and much like his performances have been this season, where he sort of started the game slowly or hasn't necessarily been fantastic throughout the whole game, this was another example here where throughout the majority of the game he was very good, very solid, making blocks and tackles, but there are a few moments, last week it was just a few of his passes that were just going to the opposition players, and here it was just a few loose touches here and there. So that's the main reason really I can't give him anything higher than a 7 realistically, because I do think that in terms of the goal we conceded, not really his fault, and in terms of his overall defensive play, I thought he was fairly solid. So in that respect, defensively, he was very good. But, like always, he's a bit of a maverick. Sometimes he does these loose passes like he did last week, and of course this week it was a few loose touches here and there, but I still thought he done well enough on the ball, and it was only a few times, like I must say. It's not like every time he gets the ball he has loose touches. It's just occasionally that it happens, but obviously he needs to try and cut out these little mistakes, because if he does that, he'll be a fantastic defender. But at the moment it's just good performances with little things, little mistakes, and a little bit of maverick moves here and there, put in. But overall I do think it was another good performance from him. In terms of his overall play, I thought he was strong, I thought he was commanding, and of course that's what you want from a centre-back. But also, even though he had these loose touches here and there, I still do think that actually he is one of our best ball-playing players in terms of picking that ball up and spreading it forward, and especially in the defence, he's certainly the best ball-playing centre-back we have at the club, and that's exactly what he's done. He used the ball quite well in the game in terms of picking up the ball, driving forward, and spreading the ball out wide or down the middle to start up attacks. So not only was he being strong and commanding defensively, but also he actually, not necessarily a threat going forward, but he was the guy who's making sure that he could supply the midfield, who therefore would supply the attackers as well. So Mamadou Sakho here, we know he's quite influential, and other than a few mistakes here and there, he is fairly solid. But of course it's great to see that he's not only been doing his job defensively and in terms of keeping us a tight unit, but also he's obviously helping the outer team in terms of going forward. So there's not really too much to say here other than, the fact that he made a few good early blocks early on and his game was fairly consistent throughout. But to be honest, I do think he deserves a 7. Do comment below with your thoughts about him and whether you do think that actually the fact that Sakho and Tomkins have gone through another game playing as a partnership and won another one and still haven't lost one, do comment below how much of an impressive force you do think they are at the back. But Mamadou Sakho here, a 7 for him. Now to move on to the centre-back, James Tomkins, who I'm going to give a 7. Composed again at the back and barely put a foot wrong. So James Tomkins here, I've given him a 7, and realistically, when you consider he's probably been one of our most consistent players this season, and especially in the last few weeks where he's chipped in with goals, and he's obviously got 2 clean sheets in the last 2 games before the Stoke City game, realistically, you've got to say he's one of our most informed players. And, once again, we know what to expect from him coming into the game, and he done exactly that. We always know that he's composed at the back in terms of defensively winning them tackles, winning them blocks, winning the headers. He done exactly that again, so once again, keeping that composure on the ball to, do his job at the back to obviously defend against the opposition. But also, I do think that he barely puts a foot wrong. So that's the thing that sort of, for me, puts Tomkins slightly above Sakho in terms of overall plays. The fact that Tomkins is absolutely fantastic, as is Sakho, but the fact that Tomkins hardly ever puts a foot wrong, that's the thing for me that puts Tomkins just above Sakho, because we know Sakho, arguably you could say, is a better defender, but because he has a few maverick moments, realistically you say, yeah, it's not great. Whereas Tomkins, on the other hand, compared to Sakho, I do think Tomkins is very good throughout, and very rarely puts a foot wrong, and that's something I like about him. And exactly that against Stoke City. They've got the height of Peter Crouch, they've got the crossing ability of Xherdan Shaqiri, but I do think that Tomkins is one of these key players in terms of us winning the game, in terms of stopping them threats, and in terms of when they do have an attack going forward, he's obviously there on hand to either clear the ball or head the ball away. So Tomkins, as was with Sakho's performance, whenever the ball got into the area, they would clear the danger. And overall, I do think, when you consider the presence that Peter Crouch has, I do think they defended pretty well against him. And to be honest, just an overall summary of Tomkins' performance, I think solid is really the word you want to use. He did what was needed from him. He done what the team needed for him. And of course, as I'm recording this on a Tuesday, it's obviously been announced that the top 3 players for the player of the season is, of course, Wilfried Zaha, as we expected, Luka Milivojevic and James Tomkins. Now, with another good performance like this, he could probably sway himself, if he isn't already at the top, he could sway himself further up that shortlist, because actually he's been very good this season. But if he continues, we've got 1 game left, if he can just push on that bit further and put in another fantastic performance, then it'll be, one of the best sort of centre-back performances I've seen all season from any season recently. When you consider Sakho was great last season, but the fact that Tomkins has been so good throughout this season and barely has put a foot wrong, he's got to be up there with one of the best centre-backs in recent time in Palace history, purely based, obviously some would argue that there's other players in the past, but when you consider the type of performances and obviously the goals and the defensive contribution that Tomkins has given to the side, not only obviously this season where he's probably one of the shortlist, for the man of the match or for the player of the season, but other ones in terms of man of the matches every game and things like that. So once again, another good performance from him. Not really too much to say there, but once again, another good performance from him. And do comment below who you voted for the player of the season, and obviously if you did vote for James Tomkins, do comment below as well why you voted for him above the likes of Luka Milivojevic and Wilfried Zaha. So James Tomkins here, a 7 for him. Now to move on to the left back, Xherdan Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 6. A couple of loose touches early on, and was guilty of not playing the right ball when in a good position in an attacking sense, but was calm when put through to score the winner. So Xherdan Aanholt here, I've given him a 6, and unlike his performances recently where he's been very good both defensively and offensively, he wasn't quite as effective in this game, and that's the main reason I've given him a 6. And if I had to compare his performance to another one, it probably would be Hennessy. He didn't do anything terrible, he didn't do anything necessarily terrible, but he didn't do anything necessarily great other than the goal. So realistically, quite an average performance, and I do think well deserving of a 6. But in terms of things to pick out about his performance, he's been very good recently in terms of his defensive performance. He's improved it quite a lot. But in this game here, whether that was just the end of the season fatigue or whatever it was, didn't start the game as well as he would have liked to, but he slowly grew into it. And there were a few times early on where he lost the ball, with a few loose touches, and there was one in particular where he tried to go, carry the ball across the halfway line, lost the ball, but give credit to him, although the ball got crossed into the area, the fact that he still tracked back, used his pace to his advantage, and still made up for that ground he lost and that space he lost, that's of course great to see as well. So the fact that he's still, obviously it's not great that he's losing the ball, but the fact that he's able to actually track back and get in behind to at least try and stop the opportunity is of course great to see. Now obviously we know how great he is offensively, the fact that he scored another goal here and the fact that he scored one, he scored quite a few this season. I think that was his 4th goal. He was still guilty in this game purely because he was quite average in this game. He's normally quite good going forward. He wasn't quite doing that on Saturday. So quite a few times, especially early on in the game, great chances to go forward and put a cross in or put a through ball in, but instead he didn't play that right ball, even when he was in a very good position, in terms of that attacking sense. And of course he didn't take the chance. So if I had to pick out one part of his performance which wasn't impressive, it's the fact that the few times he did go forward in that first half, he didn't quite take the chances that would have probably led to a goal or led to at least a shot on target, when you consider he can get into good chances, but he just sort of didn't take that option. Now when we consider how good he has been, you can obviously understand that maybe his performances might drop after having so many good games, and of course that's understandable. But obviously in that sort of occasion and that situation, it would have been nice to see him put a ball in or put a cross into the area. But in terms of the goal he did score, obviously for the majority of the game, he was fairly average. Wasn't really spectacular defensively or offensively. But the fact that he took his goal in about the 85th minute so well was of course great to see. And of course lovely build-up play from, it started with Patrick Van Aanholt playing the ball down the middle. Obviously I think it was Loftus-Cheek to Zaha. Zaha then puts a through ball in. Shawcross, yes it's probably going to Van Aanholt anyway, but Shawcross just pokes it forward, puts it on the plate for Patrick Van Aanholt. He makes no mistakes, slotting it underneath Butland, who I must say is a very good goalkeeper. So the fact that Van Aanholt, obviously in front of the Palace fans, knowing that it's a really important chance to take, the fact that he scored it and took it so well in terms of getting it under the goalkeeper, putting power on it, that was of course great to see as well. So of course he wasn't fantastic in the game, but of course the fact that he's still able to pop up with goals and assists here and there is of course great to see, because that's what really, in my opinion, makes a good player. The fact that even if they are having a bad game, they're still able to come up with the goods in terms of a goal. And that's exactly what Patrick Van Aanholt done here, obviously at the weekend against Stoke. But overall, I do think a 6 is a fair result when you consider he wasn't really that effective going forward, and he wasn't really troubled that much defensively at left back. But like I've got to say, the main reason I've given him a 6 is because he was quite good going forward, not as good as he can be, but still good. And the fact that he got the goal, and of course, like I've said already, and I've mentioned with the goal, it was a really, really well taken goal. And obviously next season, hopefully we can push on again, and hopefully he'll be another key player for us. But before I go on to talk about the midfield players, I've got to give credit to Van Aanholt. He's not only obviously a good player on the pitch, but off the pitch, he sent out a message on Twitter about Stoke saying, basically, I didn't want to celebrate for the Stoke fans because I didn't want it to be my goal relegating you to the next league, but I think you're a great club, you'll be back soon. So the fact that Van Aanholt's not only got that sort of character on the pitch with his performances, but the fact that he's got that great character off the pitch in terms of, saying to the fans, don't worry about this, you're a great club, you'll be back soon, I didn't really want to celebrate. The fact that he's got that respect, he's got that great character is of course great to see as well. And that's what you need in the changing rooms. You don't just want players who are good on the field, but you also want players who are good off the field and of course have a great character. So it's of course great to see that we have one of those in the changing room. But Patrick Van Aanholt here, the left back, a 6 for him. Now to move on to the midfielder and captain Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 6. Nice and teedy in midfield for the most part, but was booked early on in the second half. So Luka Milivojevic here, I've given him a 6, and much like the performance of Van Aanholt and Wayne Hennessy, it was a pretty average performance from him, but still he was quite important in terms of us going through to get that win in terms of his defensive performance in front of the back four, because as I say every week, that sort of role in terms of shielding the back four is very important, and once again, like he always does, he put in a very good performance there. Though in terms of his overall performance in the midfield, I think, like he always is, neat and tidy in that midfield with the majority of his passing. In terms of defensively, he's quite good at getting the ball back and going forward, and of course when he is going forward, he's got quite a good passing range. So it was quite nice to see that he was quite neat and tidy for the most part. Obviously not overall the whole game, but for the most part. But of course, his downside, I suppose, the reason you can't really say he had an overall fantastic performance is obviously because he was booked early on in the second half. Silly foul, but it's towards the end of the season. Cards don't really matter at the minute. But of course, especially if you're booked early on in the second half, you've obviously got to be careful not to get another yellow card. And I do think he does sort of restrict himself really well in terms of not getting that second booking. But also I do think, although it is a sort of niggly foul, sometimes you've got to take a foul for the team, take a yellow card, and that's exactly what he done here, because Stoke City, they're fighting for their lives, gonna put pressure on us. So of course, in a few occasions you've got to put your foot down or make a challenge, which of course results in you getting a card. And unluckily for us, it was Luca. But still, like I've said, it's the end of the season, cards don't really matter in a minute. But of course, it's not always great to see a player getting booked in the game. Obviously, I said he was quite neat and tidy for the most part in the game, and obviously the part that he wasn't, pretty good at was just a couple of mistakes he made. So there were a few times where, although he's overall quite good at tackling, there were a few times where he missed challenges, and Stoke were able to create chances with that, and it had to be Tomkins or Sakho to clear up the mess. So there were a few sort of mistakes here and there in terms of him missing tackles and challenges. But on the whole, overall, I do think that was very, very minimal, and his overall defensive performance was quite good. Now, of course, he's not normally known for being quite a neat footballer. He's sort of known as the nitty-gritty player, so he gets in, puts in a tough challenge, wins the ball back, gives it forward or crosses it forward. But actually, like what we've seen under Roy Hodgson, it was quite good to see some neat football being played from him, but not necessarily just him, but down the middle as a whole. So, of course, we normally like to play the ball out wide and play on the counter-attack, but actually it was quite nice to see that, especially Luca as well getting involved. The fact that we were playing quite nice football down the middle, which we're not normally known for, it's normally playing out wide, but the fact that we can obviously be creative in that midfield and play some neat football is of course great to see as well. Now, obviously, Luka Milivojevic, the captain, he's at the spine of the team, and of course he does get involved in that, so he is quite important in terms of winning that midfield battle, which ultimately, in my opinion, I think we did do. But Luka Milivojevic here, the captain, not really much to say about him in terms of game-changing moments, but I do think quite an average performance. I do think a 6 is a fair result. Now to move on to Yohan Cabaye, who I am going to give a 5. Was effective early on after breaking up the play in the midfield, but his influence wandered after taking a knock. Was substituted just after the hour mark. So Yohan Cabaye here, I've given him a 5, and the main reason I've given him a 5 is purely because he went off sort of towards the end, or sort of midway through the second half. Not because obviously he was playing bad, but because he sort of had a niggly injury and he was sort of pointing to his groin. So in that respect, the fact that he had to end his game early wasn't ideal. But overall, I do think that the first half he was very good. But in that second half, so 45 minutes to the 60 minutes he got taken off, he wasn't really that effective in that part, and that's the main reason that I've given him a 5, because although obviously he went off with an injury, he was obviously taking a knock, hence why he wasn't playing that well. I do still think that if he had continued the same sort of levels of performances that he had done early on in the first half, I do think he probably would have got a 6 overall. But I do think early on in the game, I thought he was very good at breaking up the play in the midfield, so rather than the opposition players getting to Luka Milivojevic for him to make a tackle, Yohan Cabaye was getting involved with it, making loads of tackles, blocks, and of course was breaking up the play, which led to us, dominating that possession and obviously having control of that midfield battle. But of course, once you've got a knock, your sort of influence sort of wanders, and of course, once he had that knock, we did see quite a drastic change in his performances. Now obviously we understand that he can't play a full 90 minutes anymore, but of course if you can't play a full 90 minutes, then you get injured as well and you still have to play on. Of course that's going to have sort of a adverse effect on your performances, and it did exactly do that here. Now, I talked about the substitution. I think Benteke came on for Yohan Cabaye. In my opinion, that sort of change did sort of help us in the game in terms of helping us to push on to get the win. But that's not to say that Cabaye was playing bad, it's just that we needed a target man in the team. We brought in a target man and we did improve a lot. But to be honest, this is not really his kind of game. It's not really a game where he could really get his teeth into and sort of get really involved. Like I've said, because he was taking that knocked. But although obviously it's not his sort of game in terms of him not playing well, I do still think, much like Luka in terms of that neat football being played, I do still think Yohan Cabaye used that ball well, which is of course great to see. Because in my opinion, if in order to win that midfield battle, it's not just about being solid defensively and obviously having your attacking influence going forward, but you've also got to have control of the midfield, and when you have possession you have to use it effectively, and that's exactly what Yohan Cabaye did. So although his game wasn't great overall, I do still think that he was quite important to us. Obviously he wasn't really involved in terms of the goals, but he was still quite important in terms of us winning that midfield battle. So overall here, Yohan Cabaye, not the best game, not the worst, a 5 for him. Now to move on to Ruben Loftus-Cheek, who I'm going to give a 6. Went close with a curled effort from just outside the box and looked to be a threat for Palace early on, but he frustrated at times and conceded a free kick from which Stoke scored with some sloppy play. The free kick then deflected off his head before flying past Hennessy, played the pass for McArthur's equaliser. So Ruben Loftus-Cheek here, I've given him a 6, and when you consider the high standards he set last weekend against Leicester City, where he obviously got a goal, great goal, and was probably, for most people, the man of the match, it was quite disappointing that he came into this game, didn't carry on that consistency, and once again had a slightly under par performance. Not necessarily terrible, but I think average is probably the word to use, and that's the reason I've given him a 6. But in terms of Palace's attacking threat, early on I think he was one of our best players in terms of driving forward, and there was one chance in particular where he went really close with a curled effort, nice counter-attack between him and Wilfried Zaha, picks up the ball on the edge of the box, cuts inside, has a shot and it curls just wide. So once again showing that he's not only got that ability inside the box to score goals, but he's also got that ability to cut inside and find a pass, or like he done here against Stoke City, to actually try and curl it into the bottom corner. And unluckily here it obviously went just wide, but of course that chance and a few others he had in the game, and obviously the fact that he was involved in our counter-attacks obviously shows that he was probably one of our biggest threats going on. But he did frustrate at times, the fact that he conceded that free kick from which Stoke scored from, a sloppy free kick to give away on the edge of the box, pushing down Shaqiri, I think it was. Yes, that's a foul, and you may say it's a soft one, but it's a foul. Yes, it was a great free kick to score from it, but the fact that Loftus-Cheek made that little mistake which led to it is obviously a little bit disappointing. And sort of after he had such a good start, he sort of just died down as the game went on. Didn't really have as much influence as he had in the first half, but still I do think he put in a decent performance, hence why I've given him a 6. But to be honest, talked about Wayne Hennessy, he couldn't really do too much about the goal and the fact that it took a deflection. But to make things worse, Loftus-Cheek conceded a free kick, and then the free kick deflected off of him. I think that if he had not jumped, it would have gone down the throat of Wayne Hennessy, so an easy catch for him. And I think that if Loftus-Cheek had jumped a bit higher, he probably would have deflected the ball up in the air, and it would have been easy to clear. So either way, he could have done better, but of course it's sometimes quite unfortunate that a free kick does deflect off of you. But like I said with Wayne Hennessy, he couldn't really do too much to save it because it was going to go down the throat of Hennessy, but because Loftus-Cheek didn't quite jump high enough, it took the deflection off of him, obviously putting it into the top corner. But like I've said, it is a great free kick from Shaqiri, although it did take a deflection, but of course that just sort of just dampens down what was not necessarily the best performance from Loftus-Cheek, and obviously one of the reasons I've given him a 6. But to be honest, if you put that bad sort of bit aside, he improved quite a lot in the second half, and most notably for the pass he gave to McArthur for the equaliser. So once again, much what we saw throughout the whole game, nice counter-attacking football from Palace. Obviously Loftus-Cheek receives the ball, I think, from Wilfried Zaha. Zaha runs inside into the box. Obviously Loftus-Cheek could either pass it to the overlapping McArthur, which he did, or he could pass it inside to Zaha. He chose McArthur, and of course McArthur was able to find the far post, which of course it was a great goal. But of course you've got to give it to Loftus-Cheek for actually being aware of his surroundings, and the fact that he was able to find McArthur's run on the overlap, and the fact that he was able to time the pass for him perfectly was of course great to see. And I suppose the only consolation for this game is the fact that he cost us a goal in terms of giving away that free kick, but also he did set up a goal, so that sort of makes up from it. Yes, he wasn't great in this game, but the fact that he was able to make up for his mistake with an assist was of course great to see as well. Now to be honest, this was a funny game from him, not in the fact that he done anything terrible, but it's just the fact that he was so good last weekend against Leicester City, and then he comes into this game here and he has an under par performance, which once again, he's a young player, so he's going to learn, but he's slightly inconsistent. Now of course it's funny because we know he's a really good player, but he has on and off games, and this was obviously one of his off games. And something that I saw against Leicester City, which I was absolutely impressed with, is the fact that he's got that ability to carry the ball forward. He lost the ball, if you compare that to the Stoke game, he lost the ball quite a lot, didn't really drive forward. So if anything, it was the complete juxtaposition between performances, because he had a fantastic game against Leicester where he was carrying the ball forward, driving forward, creating chances, whereas here against Stoke City he wasn't quite doing that. So I suppose it's slightly disappointing in that aspect, but of course every player has a good game and off game, so obviously this was one of his off games. But of course, there's been a lot of debate recently as to whether he's going to go back to Chelsea, whether he's going to sign for Palace permanently. Personally, for me, I don't think, when you consider how well he's been playing, I don't think we'll get him on a permanent deal, because of course Chelsea, possibly getting a new manager, they might want to keep him. But if we do get a chance to buy him, I would certainly 100% go for it. And even if we don't, I think we could try for another loan deal, because another season of Loftus-Cheek, obviously with the fact that how good he is for Palace, and obviously the fact that he's got that influence going forward, he would be a fantastic asset to have next season. So hopefully, if we can get some sort of deal, whether that's permanent or on a loan, sorted out, that will of course be great to see. But do comment below with your thoughts about Loftus-Cheek and whether you do want to sign him on a permanent deal, and also comment below what you thought about his performance here, because I personally thought he was pretty average. But of course, if you do disagree, then drop it below in the comment section. Now to move on to James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 7. Tenacious as always in the midfield, and showed great composure to slot home the equaliser and finish off a fine counter-attack. So James McArthur here, I've given him a 7, and much like his performances have been this season in terms of being consistent, this was once again another performance where he was full of energy, full of tenacity, as I already said there, and also, like he always does, he's full of energy, pressing down the players, pressing on the opposition, which is of course great to see. Now, to be honest, there's nothing really of note to talk about in this game in terms of any particular tackle or any particular pass that he made in the game, which was really worthy of note to mention. But as I've got to say, he's always got that energy in the midfield, and of course because of that he was quite important to us in winning that midfield battle. But in terms of the chance he had going forward, yes, there wasn't anything of note other than the goal he scored. So to be honest, to move on to that, I think that he showed great composure there. So of course it was a great counter-attack between Loftus-Cheek and Zaha, getting the ball forward. Loftus-Cheek has the ball in the box, has the option of either Zaha or McArthur on the overlap, finds McArthur, and McArthur stays composed as ever as he is in front of goal, and of course slots the ball into the far corner past Butland, which is of course a great finish. Not only the fact that he's able to run that 100 metres across the field, then obviously get on the end of the ball and score, but also the fact that he's got that curl to bend it away from the goalkeeper into the far corner, which that is of course great to see as well. And when you have such a good counter-attack, it's nice to see that something pays off and you get rewarded for that good play in the build-up. So of course it was great to see that he scored from that. But like I say every week, full of energy, pressing on the midfield, tenacity. I mention these words almost every week and I find myself repeating myself, but that's what we come to expect from McArthur, and that's what we come to see every week. But once again, good defensive performance, good offensive performance. He's showing that he's a very useful player in our side. Even when he's playing out of position, he's still quite useful. And in terms of the phrase box to box, I think you could say to an extent he is that, because he does exactly that. Now, in terms of his influence on the side, I talked about how important it will be to keep him at the club because of the fact that his contract runs out. But of course, if you listen to the 5-year plan podcast where they had obviously James McArthur as a guest, he went on to say that 2 seasons ago he signed a 4-year deal, which obviously leaves him with 2 years left. So obviously he isn't out of contract in the summer, which is of course great news. Obviously, if you want to listen to that interview, there's great insight on James McArthur, not only obviously as a playing at Palace, but obviously his early career, and also obviously Roy Hodgson as well. So if you do want to listen to that, do that. But the main thing to take from that interview is the fact that James McArthur, he's here for another 2 seasons, and obviously that's great news because he's a very important, integral player to the way we play. And of course, as we've seen in this game here, he's not only effective in terms of controlling that midfield with his pressure he puts on the opposition, but also he can pop up with a goal or 2, which is of course great to see. So if you do want to listen to that podcast, that interview with McArthur, then of course do feel free to do so, because like I've said, great insight there. But for me, the main thing to take back from that is the fact that he's got another 2 years on his contract. Now, when you consider how much of an important player he is, that's of course great news there. Now, obviously, just to sort of finish off James McArthur, I've given him a 7. I sort of already mentioned it there. But like he always does, he gives us a sort of the bog standard tenacity, his energy, his pressing. So everything he normally does, he gave it to us, plus the goal as well, which is of course great to see. So James McArthur here, a 7 for him. Now to move on to Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6. Some stray passes from him in the first half as Palace failed to really threaten. Improved in the second and worked hard, but this was not his best game. So Andros Townsend here, I've given him a 6, and much like what I said last week in terms of, although he's not having any impact in terms of assists or goals, he's still putting in the good performances and is giving his all for the team, and that's exactly what we saw here. Now, it was obviously, if you weren't at the game, you probably watched it on Sky Sports and you saw his interview with them. I think it was a really honest interview with him, saying that actually he quite likes playing up front, even though he's out of position, because he gets more of the ball, because obviously not all the players going to Zaha on the other flank. So of course it was great to see him saying stuff like that, and the fact that he likes the system is of course great to see. And you know, although it isn't the best system for him, it's good to see, like we saw here against Stoke City, although it's not ideal, he's still playing quite well and fits into the system quite well. Now in terms of the first half performance, you know, quite a few players weren't necessarily great, and you know, when you consider we were 1-0 down at half time, that's obviously quite a good indicator that players weren't really performing. But in terms of the first half, I think there was a few stray passes here and there, you know, him giving the ball away, putting crosses into no man's land, stuff like that. Obviously giving the ball away, not great, and of course of course the whole team weren't really playing great, but him in particular didn't really do well. But of course I do think that actually as a whole team we failed to threaten. So realistically, if you've got an attacker who's obviously playing in a team in a half of football where they're not really playing that well offensively, then of course it's going to be quite difficult for him to threaten as well. But much like he does every week, if he has one bad half, he'll come back better in the second half, or the other half which he's playing in. And of course he's done exactly that here. You know, the main reason I've given him a 6 is because he improved quite a lot in the second half. He worked hard like he always does, you know, running up and down that flank, getting back and defending, getting that ball forward, running his socks off, everything he always does, working hard. He'd done that there again. And although it wasn't his best game in terms of, you know, creating attacking chances, or actually creating attacking chances, or you know, taking chances himself, you know, scoring or assisting, although he didn't have that in this game, and it weren't his best game, he still works hard, and that's for me is one of the most important things for me. So of course it was great to see him improve, and of course he's one of these players that he doesn't get as much credit as he deserves, but personally for me he's one of the most important players for Palace, because much like McArthur, he pushes the opposition, but also the fact that he's got that energy to run down the flank, he's got that sort of engine to keep going throughout the whole game, and the fact that he goes back and helps defending is of course great to see as well. So Xherdan here, another performance where he worked hard. Yes, he didn't get anything off of it, and although his first half wasn't that great, but for the fact that he worked hard and his second half performance was so good, that's why I think he deserves the 6. And let's move on to our final player, Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 6. Isolated at times in the first half, and let things affect him as he was cut a frustrated figure. Also missed a glorious chance when he was found unmarked in the middle in the box by Townsend. Also provided a pass for Aanholt to score the winner. So Wilfried Zaha here, I've given him a 6. Now obviously it wasn't the best game from him, and you know, when you consider how good he was against Leicester City last weekend, obviously much like what I said with Loftus-Cheek, it's, you know, quite disappointing that they play so well and then the next game they can't necessarily match that. But obviously, like I've said with quite a lot of players, as it's towards the end of the season, you can understand players' sort of standards and performances dropping ever so slightly, and of course that's not great to see, but when you consider we're now mathematically safe, it's alright to do so. But in terms of Zaha's performance, I think much like what I said with Xherdan in terms of the first half, from the majority of the offensive side of Palace's play, I do think most of the attackers were quite isolated, and Zaha especially was doing that, and of course people were crying out for us to play Benteke, so we have a target man. We persisted with the 4-4-2, and although it worked in glimpses, in the first half it didn't seem to be working, and of course because of that it meant that Zaha was isolated. Now of course because of that, and because he didn't have much of the ball, he sort of let things affect him, and you know, he did look quite frustrated, and to be honest, for me it's quite understandable. You know, you're not getting the ball, you're not getting chances to help your team, so understandably you'll be frustrated. But to be honest, I still think in the second half he improved his game even further. Not necessarily enough to get a 7, but I still think he upped his performance. And you know, there was one great chance by Townsend. You know, I talked about Townsend, how good he was in that second half. He was running rings around, you know, fullbacks, and there was one chance in particular, got past 2 defenders, put in a fantastic ball to Zaha to score. Obviously Zaha was unmarked inside the box, but rather than taking a touch and stopping the ball dead and then having a shot, he's tried to hit it first time and it blazed over. So once again showing that yes, Townsend can find great chances, but obviously not all the time, you know, players finish them. So Zaha on that occasion, yes, we did go on to win the game, but that miss could have proved costly if we went on to draw or lose the game. So of course it's not great to see players miss chances, but the fact that he's able to get on the end of that chance from Townsend, and the fact that Townsend of course is able to create it as well, that's of course great to see as well. But to be honest, yes, he didn't necessarily have that much influence on the game, you know, especially in that first half. But in the second half, he provided that ball for Aanholt to score. Yes, obviously, it got deflected by Shawcross, I think it was. So obviously, it weren't necessarily going to go straight to Aanholt. But the fact that Shawcross was able to deflect it right into the path of Aanholt to score that winner is, of course, great to see. And of course, it's also great to see that the Premier League, rather than just sort of not give that as an assist because it took a deflection, they've actually given it as a proper assist, which is, of course, great to see, because we saw 2 goals against Watford earlier on in the season in that 2-1 win with Sakho and McArthur scoring. We saw that Zaha didn't get credited with that assist or either assist, when realistically it was both his crosses which led to goals. But of course here, which realistically there was an even bigger deflection than the 2 goals in that Watford game. But of course, even though that's the case, it's still great to see the fact that he got the assist. So even though he wasn't great in the game in terms of getting another goal, the fact that he was able to, you know, get some sort of recognition with an assist is, of course, great to see. Now, to be honest, you know, overall I do think a 6 is a sort of fair reflection of his performance. You know, I do think he was crowded out for quite a lot of the game, purely because obviously the Stoke players were up for it. They knew that their season depended on it, and of course ultimately in the end they didn't quite do that. But you did see throughout some parts of the game the fight in that Stoke side, and obviously that meant that Zaha was crowded out. But once, you know, we got going and once we got that equaliser back, all the momentum was with us, and obviously that meant that we went on to eventually win the game. But to be honest, it's not necessarily his best game in terms of his attacking contribution, but in terms of what we always see in terms of, you know, his pace, his trickery, we saw that. So in a game where he sort of lacks, you know, his attacking ability, the fact that he's still got that pace and that trickery to obviously try and at least create chances is, of course, great to see. So do comment below with your thoughts about Zaha's performance, and, you know, whether you do think we should continue with this sort of 4-4-2 formation with sort of Zaha and Townsend as a sort of unorthodox front two, or whether you do think we should change it, because obviously we've seen in glimpses here, especially in the first half, that it doesn't always work with Zaha. But then we've also seen on the other hand where actually in the second half it worked quite well. So do comment below your views on that. But Wilfried Zaha here, our final player, a 6 for him. So I'm just going to sort of move on slightly before I go on to give a sort of small summary of the game, just to move on to the 3 subs we made in the game. You know, a few weeks ago we weren't making any subs in the game, so of course it's great to see that we're now, well, Roy Hodgson's now starting to make quite a lot of substitutions, you know, making the use of them. And of course, with us pushing to try and get that win in the end, it was of course really important to make these substitutions just to freshen up the squad. And certainly the introduction of Christian Benteke did exactly do that. But in terms of Martin Kelly, he came on for Joe Ward in the 40th minute. I'll probably give him a 6 for his performance. Obviously, he came on for Joe Ward, but most people would have wanted Aaron Wan-Bissaka. But it was quite good of Roy to sort of put an arm around Wan-Bissaka and say, I'm not going to put you on the field. I don't know what exactly he said, but presumably he said, I'm not going to put you on the field of play because we need high up against Crouch. So of course, Martin Kelly, who's taller, goes on the field. So not necessarily saying that Wan-Bissaka's not good enough anymore. You know, it's quite good to see that, you know, Roy Hodgson put an arm around Wan-Bissaka and said, I'm actually going to put Martin Kelly on rather than you, just because we need that height advantage. And I think that, you know, Martin Kelly done alright there. You know, yes, we know that he's not normally good going forward from right back. Yes, he didn't really do much going forward in the game, but he came on the pitch to, you know, do a job at right back. He done exactly that, didn't really do too much wrong. Yes, there were a few times where he was out of position, especially for the first goal, in terms of he was involved in terms of giving that ball away. But I do think that, you know, you can't really fault him for that, because his overall performance was, well, his overall gameplay was to go on the field to replace Joe Ward, put in a solid performance, and he done exactly that. And, you know, like I've always said, or like I've said already, and I always say with Martin Kelly, nothing really going forward. In terms of Christian Benteke, I've given him a 5 here because he sort of didn't get a goal or an assist in this game, and he was guilty of overhitting a few passes. But I do still think he came on, he did change the game, but because he hasn't got anything to credit for that, I've given him the 5. But of course he came on for Kabay in the 62nd minute. Obviously there was one pass to Townsend in particular which he overhit, and obviously that's when a counter-attack broke down. So of course in the first half we were fantastic at counter-attacking because we had loads of pacey players on the break. Whereas on the other hand, Benteke isn't necessarily that fast counter-attacking player, but he still, you know, got forward as much as possible. And although he had one chance in particular where it was a great opportunity, he was well placed in the box, didn't really take it. But the fact that he's able to get into the box and try a bit harder than he normally does that's of course great to see. And of course, we've got to give credit for one of the goals we conceded in the fact that he won that header. You know, he has no right to win it on the halfway line, but wins the header, flicks it on, and of course, you know, we pass the ball in a counter-attack and eventually score from it. So, although I've given him a 5, he still did have an influence on the goal with that sort of knockdown header and pass the ball forward. So, although people won't really recognise his contribution in terms of changing the game, the fact that he was slightly involved in terms of getting that pre-assist for one of the goals we scored was also very good. And of course, Jeffrey Schlupp came on for Andrew Townsend in the 88th minute. Not really too much to say about him, because purely based on the fact that he didn't really have that much time to make an impact. But what I've got to say is of course great to see Jeffrey Schlupp back in the squad. Now, of course, in terms of just small summary of the game, obviously it was really superb in second half comeback in terms of getting back into the game. And of course, you know, if we lost this game, we'd have to wait another week to secure our Premier League status. But the fact that we were able to, you know, mount a second half, or a superb second half comeback to secure our Premier League status whilst then sending the host down, that was of course nice to see as well. Now, of course, it's not nice to see another team get relegated, but like Roy Hodgson said, it's not our fault that Stoke got relegated. You know, we were just another team playing them. It was their season that got them relegated, so I'm not really going to dwell too much on sending them down, and I'm not going to celebrate like other people that Stoke have been relegated. But you know, good luck to them in the Championship next season. But the fact that we were able to come back from 1-0 down, control the game, and obviously go on to win it 2-1, which was of course great to see. Now, of course, after that big win last weekend against Leicester, you know, there were lots of pressure, not only on us to perform, but also more pressure on Stoke, because we were one of the most informed teams. So there's pressure on Stoke to actually perform, because obviously they need to secure their Premier League status, which ultimately they didn't do. But of course, it did prove a little bit more difficult than it already was for Stoke, obviously playing against us, but also us having that, obviously trying to be that team with the most confidence going into the game. It was of course quite difficult for us to perform against Stoke. Now, obviously, as it turned out, it was a pretty good performance. You know, not fantastic in terms of our first half was quite lacklustre, but of course it sealed another valuable three points, which is of course a fantastic achievement in terms of securing our Premier League status after losing and not scoring in the first 7 games. But also, this win moves us to 41 points, and if we win against West Brom next week, we've really got a fantastic chance of finishing in the top 10. Now, that will be an absolutely amazing feat when you consider that we, you know, lost our first 7 games. So if we are able to beat West Brom and obviously have that chance of moving into the top 10, that will just prove how much of a good, you know, turnaround the team has had, but also what a good job that Roy Hodgson and all of his coaching staff and the medical team have done in terms of, you know, helping us to push up the table. Because I personally, at the beginning of the season, when we were bottom with no wins in 7, no goals, I was totally happy with finishing 17th. But the fact now we've performed so well, and the fact that we've got a chance to finish top 10, we might as well try and achieve that now and go all guns blazing, try and get up there, because of course our club record is finishing in the top 10. So if we could do that again, and with 34 and with 44 points as well, that of course would be even better. But to be honest, it just shows, you know, once again how well, I suppose not how, but how. Yeah, I suppose we can. Yeah, how far we've come. Let's say it like that. It just shows how far we've come since being at the bottom of the table. The fact that we've able to come from that bottom of the table, no wins, no goals in the first 7 games, and the fact that we've able to pick ourselves back up then we've went on, I think it was an 8-game unbeaten run. We're currently on a 5-game unbeaten run, and obviously we've had wins and draws in between. The fact that we were able to do that, and the fact that we were able to pick ourselves up, of course, is a great achievement in itself. And of course, towards, you know, after the season's ended, I've obviously got exams to do, but after that I will do plenty of review shows, you know, talking about transfers, talking about the season. So do keep an eye on that, because obviously there's a lot to discuss in this season, and of course I do look forward to, you know, talking about the season now that we've obviously secured our Premier League status. But to be honest, 41 points in 30 games is quite an achievement. You know, we lost our first 7 games, we've got 1 game left, so the fact that in 30 games, from coming from a position of losing 7, not scoring the 7, the fact that we've able to pick up more than a point a game is of course quite an achievement. And to be honest, you know, this performance really, you know, although it wasn't great, it did really top off, which was, yes, it was a frustrating season, but what turned out to be a superb one in the end. So hopefully against West Brom next weekend, yes, we're not necessarily guaranteed to win, but if we can get a win, that will just top off what's been a superb turnaround from Roy Hodgson's pen, and hopefully that will give us that chance to push into the top 10. So I'm now going to move on to my man of the match award. But before I do that and give you my man of the match, you know I thought had the biggest influence in the game. I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. So much like what I said last week, obviously with a 5-0 win, it was a very good performance from the whole team, and it was pretty difficult to pick out 4 players in particular to give praise. Although the game wasn't as good here, obviously against Stoke City, I still thought it was actually quite a noticeably good team performance. So actually it's quite difficult to pick out 4 players who you could actually pinpoint and say actually you were better than the rest. But I've managed to narrow it down to 4, and of course people like Wilfried Zaha, for example, Yohan Cabaye, people like this, even someone like Mamadou Sakho, these are people who are going to miss out, but not because they played bad, just because in an overall good team performance, I just think that these 4 players done slightly better. So these are James Tomkins, Patrick Van Aanholt, James McArthur and Andros Townsend. Now, what I've got to say is quite a few of these names are quite reoccurring over the last few weeks, which once again, like I talked about in the player ratings, it's good to see consistency across the squad, and that's obviously something that's quite important in terms of keeping us in the league, and luckily it's now done that. But in terms of James Tomkins' performance, I think he was composed at the back like he always is. You know, that's something we come to expect from him, and he's done exactly that in his game here. And the thing that just puts him on the shortlist, you know, it was a relatively good defensive performance. So if you had to pick out a defender, I'll pick him because he was the best player out of the back 4. And unlike someone like Sakho or Ward or even Van Aanholt, who gave the ball away on a few occasions, I still did think that Tomkins didn't put a foot wrong, and for that reason obviously he's on the shortlist. Obviously Patrick Van Aanholt here, you know, defensively, other than that one mistake where he gave the ball away, he was absolutely outstanding in the game. You know, he was the perfect left back in terms of getting forward, obviously to attack and support the wingers and the strikers, but also in terms of getting back and defending. Other than a few misplaced passes, I think he was fairly solid at the back. And you know, once again, we know how good he is and how effective he is going forward. And once again, he showed how calm he can be in front of goal. You know, obviously Shawcross put it on the plate from him, but Van Aanholt stayed composed, able to slot it underneath Butland, who's a very good goalkeeper, we must say. But the fact that he's able to stay calm and composed in that situation and hit it on target, and with it being in front of the Palace fans as well, just makes it even better. So in terms of Tomkins and Van Aanholt, both good defensively. Obviously Tomkins noticeably better, but also, you know, Van Aanholt had that threat going forward, and of course got the winning goal as well, so you've got to give him credit for that. Obviously James McArthur playing in the midfield, the word I used in the player ratings was tenacious. I think that is the best way to describe his performance, and he always is like that, but this game just really epitomised it once again. Obviously he scored the equaliser, obviously to get us back into the game. You know, great ball from Wilf to Loftus-Cheek, great overlapping run from McArthur to get on the outside of Loftus-Cheek. Loftus-Cheek gets the ball to him, lovely finish into the far corner. So once again, like with Van Aanholt, he showed great composure in terms of putting it in the net, putting it past Butland. But what you've got to consider is Van Aanholt's was straight on front and goal, whereas McArthur was from a very tight angle and he got it into the far corner, which obviously, if you're looking at both goals, you've got to say McArthur's one required a bit more skill when you consider the accuracy that he pinpointed it into the corner. So once again, it was a great counter-attacking move, and of course it was great that McArthur was able to finish from that. So of course Van Aanholt and McArthur were both good in terms of getting a goal in the game, but I do think McArthur, you've got to give credit for his performance as overall as well, because like he always is, lots of energy in the midfield, lots of pressing, everything you would expect from him. He'd done this in his game here, and it was even better. And you know, because he got the equaliser and because he was so good in that second half, he was one of the reasons we got back into the game. And of course Andros Townsend, obviously my last man on the list, he was an interesting one because offensively, other than the goals we scored, I do think it was quite a dull game. You know, it was nothing of real excitement. You know, other than a few moves we got going forward, there was nothing really outstanding. But I do think that actually, on a day where Wilfried Zaha was having a slight off game, wasn't as good as he normally can be. Obviously not bad, but just average, I suppose is the word to use. I do think Andros Townsend, you know, in the first half, he was giving away a few stray passes, but he put that behind him in the second half. He was absolutely fantastic, and obviously in the first half we really failed to really threaten the opposition, and obviously because of that, Townsend really faltered in that half. You know, he didn't really have the chances to go forward. But in the second half, he improved really a lot, worked really hard on and off the ball, so getting back and defending, as well as going forward and making fantastic runs. And although it wasn't his best game, I do think he was quite effective. You know, there were a few runs towards the end of the game where he'd pick up the ball in the left-hand side, run past 2 or 3 defenders, and put the ball in the area. And there was one example where fantastic run past a few defenders, puts the ball in on the plate for Zaha, and Zaha blasts over. So if you're looking at that situation, the reason Zaha doesn't get in the shortlist but Andros Townsend does is the fact that Townsend was creating loads of chances but the men in the middle weren't taking them. So I'm sure if someone like Zaha had just taken a touch and blasted it in and scored, I'm sure Townsend would get even more credit because his performance was good. But if he had something to show from it, of course it would be even better. But personally for me, do comment below whether you disagree with it. But for me, I do think that these 4 players did stand out for me. And, you know, like I say every week, do comment below because I like to see and hear your opinion, who you thought the best player was and whether you do agree with my shortlist. But personally for me, just going over them, you know, Tomkins, Aanholt, both fairly solid defensively. Aanholt and McArthur for, of course, getting the goals, but overall having a good performance. And of course, Andros Townsend for really being one of our biggest attacking threats throughout the game. Now for me personally, obviously the man of the match, I think it was quite an easy choice for me when you consider how much this guy changed the game in terms of getting that equaliser, and obviously the fact that just how tenacious he was in his whole gameplay. So James McArthur here, I'm going to give it to you. So congratulations, James. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was another solid performance from you. But the main reason really for me that he gets it above everyone else is just the energy, that tenacity he shows in the game, and also the fact that how good his goal was. You know, it'll go underrated, his goal, but the fact that he's able to find that far corner from that tight angle, you know, it's really quite impressive. You know, you'd find that quite a few players won't be able to do that. So the fact that McArthur was able to do that, and when you consider he was in the interview at the beginning of the week saying, you know, how he likes pressing, he likes scoring goals, the fact that he was doing an interview, then a few days later goes and scores a really important goal to get us back into the game, of course that's really great to see. So I do obviously of course have to give credit to Tomkins, Aanholt and Townsend, but for me McArthur, once again, with his just being that engine in the midfield, it was of course another impressive performance from him. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, James McArthur and Patrick Aanholt following the game.
James, congratulations, the team officially safe now. It's a great end to the season.
Yeah, it is, but we've still got another big game coming up next week. We obviously want to finish as high as possible, and results depending, we want to try and get 10th place.
But they had to come from behind today. Do you feel like the team was in control?
I thought the manager gave us a hard time at half time, but I didn't think it was as bad as maybe what he thought. But they were obviously up for it in the first half and put us under a lot of pressure. Second half we came out and dominated, especially when we got that goal. We created so many chances after that. Obviously the defenders been brilliant all season, and they withstood another goal, which was great.
Yeah, for your goal, it felt like everyone could see you running up and willing the ball to go to you. Were you screaming at Ruben?
Yeah, it was. I tried to obviously make the run. If it came to me, great. If it didn't, then I take a man away. Thankfully, I played it right in my path and I could hit first time.
And you must be delighted with the way you're playing at the moment.
Yeah, it's good to be playing regular football. Obviously, you've got a squad that's outstanding, talent all over the squad, and to keep your place and keep playing well, I'm really delighted.
And there's still a lot to play for. You said on that podcast the other night, it's 10th place you're looking for. 10th place and finishing above Brighton, I guess.
Yeah, for the fans that would be nice, but for us, we obviously want to finish above the rest of the teams. We want to finish as high up as possible, and you can see that we give everything today to try and get that win to keep us pushing on towards the season and remain unbeaten.
Actually, congratulations, team are mathematically safe now and you got the winning goal. How did that feel?
Yeah, it feels great, you know. And most of all, we're safe and we're ready for next season, you know. We knew it was going to be a tough game. We knew we had to bring our best game today because we knew they were going to come at us. And they did. Fair play to them. The first half, they put us under pressure. We could not play football at all, and we had to play the long ball. And then in the second half, we came out a different team and showed them that we can play. And we scored 2 good goals, I think.
Yeah, some great passing moves from the team today. Everyone's gelling really well, aren't they?
Yeah, especially in the second half. I think in the first half it was a bit difficult to play. They put us on a lot of pressure and forced us to play the long ball. But in the second half, I think we did fantastic. We played our own football, giving goals, run it once behind. We often Andros, I think they walked that off. And then when Christian came on, you know, Christian is a good striker and he can bring an impact, and he did today as well. And
talk us through your goal.
I can't ever remember, you know. I think I saw the space and I went forward, and then I saw Will, so I had to hold my run a little bit, and then he played it, and then I think Shawcross played it back, and I anticipated very well, and I played between the goalkeeper's leg.
Your team came from behind today. Are you pleased with their performance?
Yeah, very pleased with them. Even in the first half, I think we were a bit unlucky to go in behind. It was a silly free kick to give away, and it got a deflection. It was a good free kick. We got a deflection, and I thought that without playing particularly well, and we were certainly matching them, and we were certainly standing up to the challenge they were providing. The second half, it was a totally different story. We really got much more control. Helped a little bit by the fact they started to drop deeper and hold on to what they've got. But the second half performance was really good, and I thought throughout the attitude and the character of the team was outstanding.
And James McArthur finished that first one really well.
Well, he does it all the time, doesn't he? He's scored a lot of goals this year. He's a goal scorer, and the same for Patrick. He took his chance well. I think that the 2 goals certainly doesn't flatter the second half. I thought we created at least half a dozen really, really good opportunities. I was expecting a goal before Patrick's goal that won us the game. But 3 points here at Stoke, very difficult place to play, and I'm very pleased with A, the performance, and B, the fact that we've gone past the 40 mark and have a chance even of getting more points in the home game next week.
Yeah, we've got the home game next week. Is the aim now 10th place? Is that what everyone's working hard towards?
I think we just work hard to do well and play well in every game we play. I don't know that we need to have a particular goal, 10th place. Anyway, that won't necessarily depend on us, because there's teams above us. If they win their games, we can't catch them up. But I think the important thing for me is that the players once again showed that they have the right character, the right determination, and we'll be going out in the final game to get the best possible result we can. And we'll work very hard to get that result. And if we play as well as we played the last 2 games, then who knows, we might get it.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, James McArthur and Patrick Van Aanholt had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Stoke City. But make sure to come back next week for my post-match review of the game against West Brom. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.